Hello and welcome back to Perspectives, bringing you our daily dose of news and views covering the topics that we hope are relevant to you. Well, today we take a look at two key meetings taking place around the world. We've got Narendra Modi's visit to Russia and its big implications, and the other side of the coin, NATO's big meeting in Washington. What does this all mean? We once again report on the terrible violence against a woman by police in West Bengal, and death threats on social media against Canadian Sikhs. And finally, tensions mount in Kashmir once again, and we'll be reporting on the latest violence. Well, joining me for Perspectives, as always, is our very own correspondent in Canada, James Cousineau. Good morning, James.
Good morning, Angus, and good morning to all our amazing viewers. Keep your comments coming in. We do read them all, and we really enjoy it, no matter whether it's positive or negative. We love the feedback, so keep it coming.
And of course, together we'll be bringing you our perspectives on the daily news affecting the Sikh community across the world. As usual, we will be taking a look at those great comments which have been pouring in. Thanks so much for those. And let's move on with the show, as always, under time pressure. James, kick us off. What have you got for us today?
Well, Angus, we're going to start off today with the 5 Indian soldiers that have been killed in Kashmir. Once again, the violence and the tensions are lifting up in that region. We are seeing an increase in attacks over the past several months, and this is the disputed territory of Kashmir between Pakistan and India, and both of which lay claim to, but neither one has full control of. Now, this has, as I said, been a rising tension lately with the violence, and today, just breaking news here is that 5 Indian soldiers were killed in an ambush. And what appears to be the soldiers that were coming in to the region, and there were aggressive attackers that were hiding in the hills. They went ahead and took the shots. The Indian Army did have a very rapid response with backup moving in. The attackers did flee the scene. The Indian soldiers were proceeding to find them and locate them in the hills. At this point, it's unclear whether or not they have been located or not. This area has seen an armed insurgency rising since 1989, but the violence has kind of come down over the last several years, and then just over, as I said, the last few months, it's been rising again. But this whole debate and this whole struggle has gone all the way back to 1947 with the partition of India and Pakistan, and then Kashmir having some autonomy, but now both sides are once again playing a tug of war. It's almost like a divorce in North America where the parents are fighting over the child, but nobody wants to actually listen to what the Kashmir people want and what their goals are. So it's really tough. And with the lack of respect for Muslims when it comes to the India rule, it definitely adds another layer because the majority of the region is Muslim. So it definitely takes it up another level with the Indian government and the Indian control. So here the article goes on to discuss a bit more about the region and the flashpoint. India does accuse Pakistan of hiding and allowing the insurgents to take cover in safety shelter in Pakistan, which Pakistan, of course, vehemently denies that. So it'll be interesting to see if peace can be brought to the region. It's, of course, a hot button topic for many Kashmir people around the world who are watching from outside to see what's happening once again. But unfortunately, the war in Ukraine, the unsettlement and the violence in the Middle East, this has taken priority and really taken the spotlight off of Kashmir. So it's something that we want to bring light to because, of course, we want to see peace. We want to see respect for life and law around the world, as most people do. And it's sad to see that the violence is again ramping up in that region. With that, I'll pass it back to you there, Angus, for some comments on that story. Let's move forward with that.
Yeah, what to do with Jammu and Kashmir? It's such an open wound in northwest India. If we look at the recent history of J&K, in 2019, Narendra Modi's BJP government took control of Kashmir. It had under the constitution, under India's constitution back to partition days, it had special reserved status. The whole region was given special reserved powers to have some level of autonomy. But in 2019, Narendra Modi essentially ripped up that article in the constitution and took full control of J&K. And this move, this ripping up of that article, was endorsed by the Supreme Court, essentially rubber stamped by the Supreme Court. And as a result, Modi poured in hundreds of thousands of Indian troops. They immediately rounded up any of the political leadership in the state and detained them, sent them to jail. Any dissenters were also rounded up and locked up. The internet was closed down. Any free press, any media that dared criticise what had happened was immediately closed down. And it's still going on. Any free press in J&K is immediately closed down if it's too critical. Journalists in the region are intimidated and threatened by the police and the state. So it's there's a lot going wrong from the Indian government side in J&K. But let's balance that with what is also going on and has been going on since partition. Islamist extremists have taken advantage of this situation. There is no doubt that Islamist extremists have poured in from Pakistan and possibly from Afghanistan as well, who are not so territorially bound, but they are more driven by religion, by religious motivation. And of course, the population of J&K is majority Muslim. But this also highlights the cultural differences between J&K and the rest of India. It is majority Muslim as opposed to majority Hindu India. And this, just all it does is it highlights the cultural differences of J&K and the rest of India. And this creates division, which in turn is being taken advantage of by Islamist extremists. So Modi has a problem with J&K, and I don't see a short-term solution. His solution is just to use brute force, is to pour hundreds of troops in, is to destroy human rights in the region, and essentially just risk international opprobrium, which he has done. He's received huge international criticism for what he's done in J&K. But that's been his approach. Well, one could argue the longer term solution, and there is really, to me, only one long-term solution, is that you will never integrate J&K into India. It will never form part of a united India culturally because it's just too different, as I've said. So to me, it's not unforeseeover that J&K could be one of these dominoes that we referred to when India potentially breaks up. Lots of our podcast guests over the last year or so have said that they can foresee the breakup of India because it is made up of so many diverse parts, so many diverse cultural regions, like the Punjab, like J&K, etc., etc. So maybe that there is a tipping point for J&K where if Khalistan happens, if the Punjab goes independent, it's likely J&K will follow immediately afterwards. So yeah, that to me is in many ways the only long-term solution is India just carves it away. It just carves off like, when a body has cancer, what do? You cut out the cancer because that's the only way to stop it spreading and causing problems to the overall body. So why not carve away J&K? Give it its autonomy, even to some degree. Give it back its autonomy. I don't know, James. It's one of those. I'm not an international politician. I'm not a solution provider. I'm just reporting what's happening. But certainly, as far as I can see, there is only one solution, James.
Yeah, and I mean we've seen it in history with the breaking up of different nations, and of course the USSR being one of the largest. So it is something that is an option, but hopefully we can find solutions before we find, the destruction of certain countries and breaking it up. It would be so much nicer if we could just find peace.
Indeed. Okay, James, let's move on to our second story. What have you got for us?
Absolutely. And a historic meeting in Washington between the NATO leaders. This is the 75th anniversary of NATO, which, of course, has fairly new members with the different incidents going on around the world, including the war in Ukraine. It has definitely spurred on for people to want to join the alliance. Now, this, of course, as I stated, is the 75th anniversary, so it's a big meeting. But on the topic of Ukraine, that seems to be what will take a very big portion or focus of this meeting. And with that said, the leader both here in Canada, which is Justin Trudeau, he is in attendance at the meeting, but other world leaders as well are really encouraging NATO members to come together and continue to support the fight in Ukraine. And this is essential because, of course, Putin is going to want to break down the resolve of all of the member nations and all of the ones who are supporting Ukraine in order to advance their own initiatives and their own goals for the end game of taking over those annexed regions. So it's going to be at top of mind. Now, of course, I also feel that there are going to be a lot of discussions at NATO about security threats, including that of India. And we've talked about this before, where India has definitely overtaken Russia in terms of their threat to Canadian sovereignty and interference. So it'll be interesting to see how the NATO members go forward with discussions on India, on Russia, and all of the international security that they see as threats. And of course, it's not so much the physical threat right now of India, it's what they're doing behind the scenes, whether it's cyber attacks and cyber hacks, right through to, of course, the extrajudicial killings of a Canadian on Canadian soil and the attempted assassination of an American on American soil. So this will be, again, definitely a big hot topic discussion for many leaders there in Washington this week. So once again, everything kicks off tomorrow officially, but it was something that we felt, or today I guess at this point, but something that we felt we needed to shine a bit of light on, and also just to make sure that we acknowledge that we'll keep an eye out. We'll bring you stories as they happen if we get any information about discussions on that interference and threat coming from China, India, Russia, and so forth when it pertains to the NATO meetings. With that, I'm going to throw it right back at you there, Angus, and let's get your perspective on this issue.
Yeah, NATO. Ooh, this has been a bit of a hot topic, hasn't it, recently? NATO, I think, almost indisputably, has been quite aggressive over the last decade. I think it's been quite aggressive in terms of pushing its opponents, and opponents particularly I'm looking at Russia and, of course, China. Now, the Ukraine war happened, and you can choose your conspiracy theory of choice, but basically it's very clear that the West, and that includes both the European Union and NATO, have been pushing, have been provoking, have been probing Putin's Russia. And it's one of the reasons that many argue that Russia have essentially gone into Ukraine is because it's in response to Ukraine moving or being seduced by NATO and the EU. And their arguments are that EU and NATO have actually essentially been infiltrating Ukraine. Ukraine has been traditionally a very... It formed as a buffer country, essentially, between East and West after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And it has been argued that NATO and the EU's infiltration of Ukrainian politics has moved Ukraine more towards the West, which in turn has provoked Putin and Russia to try and rebalance that, and essentially in turn led to the invasion of Ukraine. Now, that may or may not be right, but essentially what we have witnessed over the last decade or so is this potential expansion of NATO. Now, expansion of NATO comes with a price, and I'm looking at countries like Finland, for example, who are now applying. I think maybe they have been accepted into NATO. And again, this is encircling Russia, which again is enraging Russia. So, of course, it's not surprising that Russia has fought back. So it has ratcheted up global tensions, this expansionism. Now, let's balance this with Donald Trump's attitude towards NATO. And this is where it starts getting interesting. Donald Trump has threatened to pull the USA out of NATO. Why? Because he doesn't see the value in NATO, essentially primarily because he doesn't believe that many NATO countries, and he's looking at countries like Germany and France, some of the key Western allies in Europe, they have not been pulling their weight. They have not been contributing financially to NATO. And I believe, I don't know the precise statistics, but there is an expectation under NATO rules that every nation will put in at least 2% of its GDP into its defence capability. And Germany and France and several other countries, in fact most other countries, have not been fulfilling this, whereas the USA have been overcompensating by increasing their contribution to their defence capability by much more than 2%. So Donald Trump has simply argued the USA has been carrying the weight of NATO. The USA has been carrying the weight of these European nations. Why should we as a nation be using our resources to defend you when you're not pulling your own weight? You're not contributing to NATO. So that has been his argument. And it is a valid argument. The danger there then, James, is what happens to NATO. If he pulls out of NATO, what happens to NATO? I don't know. We're into a very unfamiliar territory there. Does it make the world a more dangerous place, James? What do you think?
And I think that if it came to that point, I do believe the other nations would be forced to step up before we saw the dissolution of NATO. And Canada is just as guilty. We spend 1.76%, which is an increase working towards that 2% goal. But we do expect that some of the world leaders will be chastising Justin Trudeau at the summit this week because we have not only failed at our obligation at the 2%, but he also is going empty-handed in terms of a plan to get us there. So we do expect some pushback on that, and rightfully so. As a NATO member and a member of the alliance, we made that commitment, and we definitely should be honoring that commitment we made.
Indeed. And of course, this brings up the whole prospect of global geopolitics, which are in such a state of flux at the moment. It's becoming a very polarised world. And I want to start talking about, I want to take a look at a meeting that's been taking place over the last day or so. Narendra Modi with Vladimir Putin. Modi has flown to Moscow and is being feted and welcomed by long-term ally Russia. And he's had a very intense meeting with Vladimir Putin. Now, this is Modi's first visit to Moscow since the Ukrainian invasion. And this visit is sending out a very clear message. Of course, we have the NATO meeting going on in Washington that Biden's hosting. And the timing of Narendra Modi's visit to Putin it's a very clear message. Now, the Indian government claim the timing is just pure coincidence. But is it really? You know, the fact that it's happening on the 75th anniversary of NATO's meeting, that India is meeting Russia. Now, India has a very long-term relationship with Russia, as we know. It goes back many decades. It certainly goes back to partition. And it goes back, of course, to 1984, where it was argued, and one of the stories I remember reading about was that Indira Gandhi, one of the nemesis of the Sikh community, the person behind the terrible atrocities of 1984, it's been discovered through documents that have since been revealed from the intelligence agencies that Russia was in cahoots. The KGB were in cahoots with Indira Gandhi. And the belief is that the KGB wanted the Sikh community essentially destroyed because they had tried to convert young Sikhs into communism, into supporting the Russian regime at the time. Russia was very expansionist in those days. It was moving through Afghanistan, Pakistan. Its agents were operating very widely in those regions. And it tried to recruit the Sikh youth to its cause and failed because, of course, the Sikh youth were very married to Sikhi and they refused to be converted to actually essentially what was a secular culture of Russia. And in response to that, the KGB, in revenge, then allied with Indira Gandhi and poured money into Indira Gandhi's government, essentially to prop it up, and then to turn on the Sikh community through what happened in 1984, the genocides in 1984. So those roots between Moscow and Delhi go very deep and very historic. So this meeting is, as I said, the first one since the Ukraine invasion. And it's what the message from NATO was very clear. NATO were trying to send out a message that Russia is isolated on the world stage after its Ukrainian invasion. But this meeting between India and Russia is actually sending out a counter message saying actually Russia is not so isolated because India is cozying up, as it has done in the past, to Russia. So Modi is saying, we see Moscow as an ally. So, of course, it does bring out all sorts of dynamics here because, of course, Russia is also very closely tied, very allied with China, particularly over recent years with the Ukraine thing. But India, in turn, has a very tense relationship with Beijing. We've seen all sorts of tensions mounting up on its borders, particularly in northwest and northeast India, Ladakh and over in Assam. And we've seen India massing troops on these border regions. And of course, in turn, India has had to send troops to these regions to bolster their border. We've seen all sorts of incursions and actual breakouts of violence between the troops. So this has created all sorts of interesting dynamics. And this meeting between Modi and Putin is going to throw up a lot of interesting discussions. But let's look at what they will discuss. What is on the agenda between Putin and Modi? Well, the first one, obviously, is the geopolitical issues. It's the geopolitical relationships. How does Russia sit in the global family? And therefore, in turn, how does India sit? And India is very clever at this. India plays a game where it's not aligned. It's very clearly not aligned with the West, but it hasn't aligned with China and Russia otherwise as well. India has always made its own decisions based on its own self-interest. It has many descriptions have described India's position. They call it multipolarity or non-alignment. It essentially makes decisions based on its own self-interest. So it might align with the West on some things and align with Russia on the others. But other issues that will be on the table in these talks. One of the big ones, of course, is energy supplies, these grey imports of Russian hydrocarbons, gas and oil. Now, we do know that India has been buying Russian oil, and this flies in the face of international sanctions. After the Ukraine war, the global family sanctioned Russia, saying nobody must buy Russian oil. We must starve, we must isolate Russia. But India has, on the quiet, been buying Indian oil. And of course, that money that pays for the oil is being recycled through the Russian economy to fund the Ukrainian war. So that's the whole area that has upset a lot of people in the West. But India is a massively growing economy. It needs energy to grow. Energy is the one fundamental factor that drives an economy. So India desperately needs oil. So it needs Russian oil. So one of those discussions that we'll be having is Modi will be asking, okay, we need longer term contracts. We need security of supply of oil and gas from Russia. So I guess a lot of these discussions will be investing in Russian infrastructure, investing in the companies to build these longer term contracts to secure a longer term supply of oil and gas to essentially drive India's growth in the coming decades. There is a massive trade imbalance between India and Russia. There's a $64 billion trade deficit. $64 billion overall trade between India and Russia, but the trade imbalance, get this, out of 64 billion, 56 billion is going one way. This is India buying Russian goods, essentially. It's oil and gas is the main supply. So one of the big things that Modi will be addressing is, look, why can't we balance this? We need Russia to buy more India exports to try and balance out this trade imbalance. But of course, the problem that they're going to encounter there is, of course, these international sanctions. Payment is a global issue. Payment methods, we live in a globalist world now where most payment systems, most credit systems run through an international infrastructure that has been sanctioned heavily by most countries on the planet. So there is this difficulty of how do they transfer money essentially between Russia and India, because usually a lot of these trades, they have to occur in a currency, and most of these trades occur in US dollars. And of course that is a sanctioned methodology of transferring currency. So of course the other big area is military. No doubt Modi and Putin will be discussing military cooperation and, of course, the supply of technology. Russia stands isolated in terms of industry. Particularly, it's been heavily sanctioned, so it has to resource military supplies from somewhere. Now, we know it's getting a lot from China, and it's probably getting a lot of technology from India. So no doubt part of this trade imbalance will be addressed through military supplies and potentially Indian technology, which is growing heavily. India's technology capability is growing. And then finally, we look at the only probable area of divergence, and that is over the China-Russia alliance. And no doubt Modi will be asking Putin, is this going to hurt India? What are you doing? What comfort can you provide as an ally that your alliance with China is not going to hurt Indian interests going forward? So the question is then, how will this meeting be reported? We'll be watching the press over the coming days to see how it will be reported. But no doubt, Modi is sending out this message that we still align with Russia. He's sticking two fingers up to the West and saying our historic relationship with Russia is still solid, it is still going strong, and we still have very close ties with Russia. And basically saying to the West, what are you going to do about it? James, what indeed is the West going to do about it? What can it do about it?
Well, it's about trade, and I think that it is also about leveraging one side to the other in terms of increasing trade revenue, increasing the balance of trade, which is essential. Of course, India gets a vast majority, I believe it's over 65% of its military equipment and weapons from Russia still. So these are key points that they want to raise. Now, does that mean that the U.S. or the West are going to look to trade and increase military spending out of India and buying, U.S. or, military from other NATO members, whatever? I just don't see it happening. I don't see them allowing that technology in the hands of India, given that they are very much, as you stated earlier, aligned with their own interests. And rightfully so. I don't blame them for that. I actually have some respect for them in the fact that they don't just bow down and, and take it from any other country. They do stand their own ground and do what's best for their government. But unfortunately, it doesn't translate down to the people of India in all areas. So that's the sad part. Again, Russia, in terms of selling off oil, they're doing it at, basement sale prices. So they are cutthroat on the prices, and that's trying to, again, keep revenue coming in to support their war in Ukraine. So it's expected that there will be discussions. Actually, Modi is expected to have some discussions with Putin about the war in Ukraine, which will be the first time that there's been a very forward discussion between the two on a public stage or in a public announcement since the war started. So we'll have to wait and see how that plays out and how this whole trade and meeting right now in Russia plays out for the rest of the world in increasing trade as well. One of the stumbling blocks, of course, to increase trade with Canada, the US, and the UK is once again the disrespect of rule of law and individual sovereignty of those nations. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the NATO meeting versus the Putin and Modi meeting going on right now.
Indeed, very good point. Very good point. Okay, let's move on to my second story. Let's scale down from global geopolitics to local politics. And we've reported recently on violence against women in India, which is endemic, and it's a terrible issue that we regularly report on. And one particular region that has, certainly in recent years, really where it's become such a big issue, and that's the region of West Bengal. Now, we reported the other day in West Bengal that the governing party, the TMC, has presided over a state that has witnessed an awful lot of violence against women. Now, this story, I just want to report just a little context here. And again, this is just to remind our viewers about what's been going on in West Bengal politically. Now, the TMC, who govern West Bengal, was founded by a lady called Mamata Banerjee in 1998. And the party was a breakaway faction from National Congress Party, the INC, and it rapidly rose to prominence in the politics of West Bengal under this lady's leadership. And the TMC is now the third largest party in India after the BJP and National Congress. And it's been ruling West Bengal since 2011, so it's been there for 13 years. The party has a long list of all sorts of criminal charges, including corruption charges, amongst many others. But the name of the party, and I want this is interesting. I want to talk about the name of the party because it's very relevant to what we're going to talk about next. Now, the name of the party translates in Bengali to the All India Trinamool Congress Party. Trinamool is a Bengali word that means literally it means grassroots, and the symbol of the party is a sapling. It's a young tree emerging from the ground, and the symbol is known as a Jura Gaspul, which is Bengali for grass and flower, or two flowers with grass. And the usage of All India in the party's name represents a rejection of elitist Indian National Congress, from which it broke apart from. And the slogan of the party in Bengali is Mamata Manush, which in Bengali means mother, motherland and people. Now, the reason I'm explaining all this is because all this paints a very warm, cosy picture of femininity. It's a very feminine context. Even the party ruled by this lady, Mamata Banerjee. And yet, this party is presiding over extreme violence against women. It doesn't add up. There's this paradox here. And I want to show you quite a disturbing video, and viewers who are sensitive, please look away now. But this is a video that has been spreading around social media. So I'll just play this video for you. Now, how disturbing is that? This is a video coming from Aryadaha in the Kamahati municipality in Kolkata in West Bengal. And this is a man, Jayanta Singh, beating up a woman who apparently has been found guilty of some crime. So the police are involved in this. And this Jayanta Singh, he's a close associate of a local politician, TMC's member of the Legislative Assembly, Madan Mitra. So basically, what's happening here is a woman has been found guilty in some local kangaroo court of some crime, and she's being publicly beaten by men with sticks. Now, the word misogyny doesn't even describe this. This is just blatant, outright violence of men against women. Words cannot describe how immoral this is. It's not even just illegal, it's immoral. It flies in the face of any humanity. Whatever politics you come from, whatever your background is, this is just unacceptable in any country on this planet. A woman being held by men and beaten by other men with sticks, whatever her crime. James, I guess you're as speechless about this as I am.
That's an understatement, Angus. It's just the atrocity that we see unfolding there is just outrageous. And of course, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and other groups have been bringing this to the forefront for a generation, and it's still going on. And in this day and age, it's not something in the Western world that we really think of when it comes to these mass mobs and kangaroo courts that are just going forward with brutality and violence against women and others. It's just unspeakable what's going on and why it's allowed to continue decades later. It's just, I'm at a loss for words, Angus. It just has to stop, and people need to be made aware of what's going on, because it is so often left out of the traditional media cycle. And with the high restrictions of social media, somebody went and put themselves at a great risk of danger by spreading this video online. So, to them, I can't say enough how brave they are to get this video out. And we know that, with the history of the kangaroo courts, that person put themselves at grave risk of harm. So it's, again, Angus, I'm at a loss for words on that other than that.
Yeah, and here's an interesting ironic twist to this and what you just said, James. I found this video on an RSS extremist's Twitter feed. And even he, and this is indicative of how bad this is, of how immoral this is, this was highlighted on a Hindutva extremist Twitter page. Even this person was calling out, this is disgusting. So even the far right in India are saying, this is appalling, this must not happen. So yeah, things like this transcend politics. This isn't even related to politics. This is basic humanity. And it's interesting that this was even called out by the extreme right wing in India. So and we reported only a few days ago about the violence in Manipur. And of course, last year we reported on a terrible story where 2 women likewise were stripped naked and allegedly gang raped in Manipur. And again, a story that transcends politics. Again, it's just basic evil, the evilness of humanity when men are just lose control of themselves. It's appalling. So let's move on to my next story. And again, interestingly, the connection to this is. I found this video, this terrible beating of this woman. It was on a Hindutva extremist, and his Twitter feed is very well known on Twitter as being an outlet of the RSS, of the right wing in India. And this gentleman, Mr. Sinha, his Twitter feed, he calls himself Mr. Sinha, Sinha, and he regularly posts up all sorts of videos, and he makes all sorts of very extremist right-wing comments. He's very anti-Sikh, and his comments about the Sikh community are always very offensive on many levels. And it's always very interesting to trawl through his Twitter feed to find out and just get a flavour of how extreme the right wing is in India and the sorts of things that they commit in writing on Twitter, or X as they call it now. And so this story, I want to highlight a particular story that was only posted up in the last day or so. Now, in Canada, James, I believe on the 28th of July is the next Khalistan referendum date. And I think that's happening in Calgary. And of course, it's now becoming widely publicised that this is the next date for the Khalistani referendum. Now, in response to this, Mr. Sinha on X, in his feed, he has made the following statement. Khalistani rally in Canada. It promotes the July the 28th referendum to separate Punjab from India by US-based Sikhs for Justice, dedicated to Talwinder Singh Parmar, co-conspirator of the 1985 Air India bombings. Now, two things here. Of course, he's referring to the referendum, but he's also referring to this the 1985 Air India bombings, which of course we talk about on a regular basis, which has been accused of being a false flag event done by actual Indian intelligence. There are accusations that this was not done by the Sikh community and the pro-Khalistani community, but in fact was a false flag actually done by the Indian intelligence agency back in 1985 to try and turn the public opinion against Khalistanis and the Sikh community. Now, Mr. Sinha is a regular critic of this community. And at the end of this comment, he makes this statement: "It's high time Canada needs a lesson. I hope RAW has a plan." RAW, of course, is the Indian Intelligence Agency. And RAW is the agency, research and analysis wing of India, that has been accused of being behind the murder of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and behind the attempted assassination of Gurpatwant Singh Pannu. So what this guy is saying on Twitter, and this is a very high-profile character, he is saying he hopes that RAW will teach Canada a lesson and the Khalistanis in Canada. What he's basically saying, in a veiled way, is he hopes there's going to be more assassinations. So what he's basically saying, he is encouraging the Indian Intelligence Agency to assassinate more Sikhs in the diaspora. Now, this guy, he's an Indian political commentator, and this is his description. "I am an Indian political commentator. I specialise in foreign policy. I'm a Hindu rights activist, a proud Bharatiya, contact for SM manager, blah, blah, blah." So he admits he's basically a right-wing paid-up member of the RSS. Now, what followed that call for arms against Sikhs in Canada? Lots and lots of death threats. I'll read you a few. Kadwa Sak says, Panu's time on this earth is numbered, just a matter of time. So this gentleman is saying that Gurpantwant Singh Panun's time on earth is numbered. In other words, he's going to be assassinated soon. Debasis Roy said India should really do what Canada accuses it of doing. In other words, yeah, actually India should be killing Sikhs, as Canada has been accusing India of. And it goes on, comment after comment of death threats. Now, in the West, if people made comments like this, made death threats on Twitter, the police would be knocking on their door. It is illegal. It is a criminal offence in the West to call for any violence against any other person. It is against the law. Yet, here in Twitter in India, there are comments after comments after comments of these right-wing extremists calling for the assassination and violence against Sikhs around the world. Imagine what's going on in the Punjab then. These are people calling for violence against Sikhs in the diaspora. You imagine then what is secretly going on in the Punjab against Sikhs in the Punjab by the right-wing extremists and these RSS mouthpieces. It's terrifying, James, isn't it? We talk about what's going on in social media. I mean, social media is a bear pit, but this is just blatant death threats that are illegal, aren't they, James, in the West?
And there's a point where freedom of speech crosses the line, and that's a delicate balance, especially with Elon Musk's continued support of freedom of speech and just been very public about it. But there's also a heavy investment back and forth between several of the major social media companies, such as Twitter and Facebook, among others, which should be cause for concern. People in the U.S. are screaming about TikTok, and yet they're not doing enough to go after Twitter and Facebook and the high-level investments between them and India billionaires who are very closely connected to the Modi government and other politicians, which definitely should give a real warning about the validity of the utilization of our personal information, as well as the reliance of credible information coming through social media. And I just see it more and more where they're using social media to influence and to cause division in Western cultures. So, it's just unbelievable that in the Western world, we just wouldn't stand for people making death threats like that. And here they are, very clearly. And I am looking to be there in person to bring some live reports or some, update reports from the vote in Calgary. It's about a 12-hour drive from where I'm at, so I'm looking to be there at the end of the month and bring you some information direct from there, exclusive to Satluj. So keep tuned for that.
Great. And actually you bring up a really good point there, James, about social media and Indian government control. It's a great classic example of double standards here, where any outlets outside of India are banned from broadcasting in India. Their messages are not allowed to be seen in India. And of course, Twitter, Facebook and these social media platforms are heavily controlled by the Indian government. Basically, it's a case of you will abide by our rules if you want to be seen by our Indian audience, or else. And yet, in return, there is free reign. India lets its own people, particularly the RSS and the Hindutva extremists, it lets its own people put up stuff like this, death threats against other people. That's okay. So it's a classic case of double standards. We won't let the Indian people actually hear the other side of the narrative, but we will expose them to death threats, incitement to violences. And of course, where these things, and just for our viewers' information, we in the West have freedom of speech. You can basically say almost anything, however offensive, but the line that is drawn is when it starts to incite violence. That is the key line. And here, these are very, very clear crosses of that legal line. These incite violence. These are comments that are encouraging people to attack, to be aggressive, to even kill other or Sikhs around the world. So yes, James, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that one up. Okay, let's move on because time, as always, is against us. So, as always, we have been receiving lots and lots of your fantastic comments Let's take a look at some of them. And our first batch, again, our podcast with our interview with Dr. Sandhu evoked lots and lots of great comments. One of our regular contributors, Amrit Pal, who always sends us some really interesting comments, he said, in the area being claimed by Sikhs, there's 80% non-Sikhs and only 20% Sikhs. As Khalistan people are fringe, then India should defeat them in the referendum, thus settle the matter. India fears that even non-Sikhs would want independent sovereign nation, Khalistan, etc., etc. Yeah, basically, we're back to the referendum in the Punjab. If India's so confident that the Punjab will be against Khalistan, then hold the referendum. This is the argument that we forever trot out. If you are so confident in your views, BJP, then hold a referendum. You know, prove that you're right, but they won't. And then Jaswant Singh responds to this. The referendum will require only the indigenous population of Punjab to vote. It's not a Hindus versus Sikhs referendum. It's a referendum of the Punjabi-speaking people of Punjab to become a separate country. Yeah, a very sensible comment. It's basically, all referendums are designed to be as fair as possible on the whole. And so the referendum, if it's held in the Punjab, it must be held for all people in the Punjab, whether they are Sikhs or not. And I do, if I recall correctly, the original Sikh Empire, I think, was not majority Sikhs. It was a multi-faith. It was a multi-faith population of the original Sikh Empire, and Punjab is essentially becoming the same. And so this referendum would be probably a very fair referendum, and it is very likely, as the comment is made here, it's very likely that many non-Sikhs in the Punjab actually would vote for independence, would vote for a sovereign state, because they want autonomy. They want the ability in their region to make their own decisions. They want to be able to tap into their own regional resources, the river water that's so valuable, the agriculture. They are the breadbasket of India. Why should they be exporting so many of their valuable resources to other parts of India but getting nothing in return? That's a huge argument. So yeah, James, referendum. The referendum is a tool of democracy, and clearly they're not wanting to do that in India.
Absolutely, and with the referendum on Khalistan, a lot of people are overlooking this simple point that there are votes. There's a referendum. People can vote yes, people can vote no. It's not about everybody has to vote yes. It is about having the ability to speak your voice and have your vote heard. So again, people talk like it's just forcing everybody to vote yes to something, but it's actually both sides. And there's respect by the Sikhs for anybody voting in either direction. So I think that's much overlooked in the Western world.
And the big question always is, if any democratic or so-called democratic government does not hold a referendum, despite a lot of pressure, the question is always asked, why? What are you afraid of? That's the reality. I always use the Scotland example here in the UK. We had a referendum for Scotland to go independent, and we resisted it for many, many years because, clearly we were afraid, or the British government was afraid of the UK breaking up. But in the end, they had no choice. We are a democracy, and the move for an independence referendum was so great that the British government had no choice in the end, even though they were terrified of what potentially could happen. They had to have that referendum. In the event, Scotland voted to stay within the Union. But at least they were given that voice. And this is what the Punjab is being denied over and over again. For decades, its democratic voice is being denied. Our next story, I Own the Law Now. This was one of our shows a few days ago. Now, James put together a very interesting video about Manipur. And Jay Singh has commented, you mentioned the Manipur pictures were provided by the Indian police. How credible are those pictures? Because Indian governments and agencies are well known for staging opponents as terrorists to, of course, reduce their support. So the word can just ignore their genocide. It's nothing new. The Indian government is notorious for creating fake news and pictures. Absolutely it is. Yeah, James, your thoughts on this, your Manipur story?
Well, and it's something that we've discussed in the past about, the ability and the very aggressive use of deep fakes when it comes to any type of media. And this definitely is one where it has been put out by the Indian police. Is it a motivation by them to get further funding because they are short-staffed and facing deep challenges? Or is it a narrative by one side to pit the world against the other? Again, it's, they've got the pictures out there and we verified where they came from. However, whether or not they've been staged, again, we can only go so far without being there to take our own images. So it's, again, something that takes a lot more balanced look, and that's the best that we can do in terms of verifying and in terms of making sure that we don't just take one source, we go to several. So.
Yeah, and it's always very interesting when we research stories, and quite often I will take a look at the mainstream Indian media's interpretation of stories, and it's actually funny. Some of them are so extreme, so extremely partisan, so pro-BJP, their interpretation, how they twist the narrative to support the government line is just shocking. So what I have learned, even independently, is Indian media, you just cannot believe a single word it says. It's quite a shocking interpretation of every story. So,
and as sad as it is, we still see that in the Western world with certain media outlets being very pro-left, ones being pro-right. So we see, not to the same level as what you see in India for the blocking of media, but just the extremism of certain media outlets going one narrative or the other. So.
Yes, we do, James. That's absolutely right. The one thing I would say in mitigation of that is at least we do have some outlets to balance out the if one side seems too partisan, we at least have the free press where other outlets can provide a counter narrative, which is not allowed in India. That's the key difference. So. Jaswant's also commented here, and he talks about the history of betrayal of the Sikhs since 1947, and how the formation of Khalistan is justifiable due to the oppression. But Jaswant also asks how to explain how the British can help resolve the mistakes made at the time of partition, causing the Sikh nation to go through its genocides and that terrible time during the migrations during partition when hundreds of thousands, if not millions, were killed, massacred. But how can the British help resolve this and essentially recompense for handing the Sikhs into the hands of what he calls the butcher Hindu regime? Oh, Jaswant, I've talked about this a lot. What can Britain do? The biggest problem is, what will Britain do? It's not what it can do, it's what it will do. And I've talked extensively that I believe the British establishment is so close to the Indian establishment. I don't think there is a will in the British establishment to recompense for what we did in partition. There's a lot we could do. We can stand up and demand Khalistan and say to Narendra Modi, there's no trade deals, there's no further discussions. We will ostracise you. We will isolate you on the world stage until you grant the Punjab its right to self-determination and you improve your human rights records. But it won't. I'll say that now. There's no way the British establishment will do that. And all eyes now are on the British government, the new British government, to make good on its promises, to at least even hold an investigation into what happened in 1984. Let's see. But yeah, we know James Canada is definitely on the side of this. Justin Trudeau's been very robust, very vocal about his criticisms. The US has been vocal, but slightly less so. But certainly Justin Trudeau, I'm no fan of Justin Trudeau, but I salute Justin Trudeau for his stance on Khalistan and the right to self-determination, James.
Right. And that's something that we've seen where he is actually standing up to certain things or for certain things. And it's not so much that he is supporting Khalistan as itself. What he really wants the world to know is that we support the freedom and the right for people to have that referendum and to have their voices heard and to have that right of self-determination. So it's a big difference. India sees it as a threat to them, saying Canada's doing this, Canada's doing that. Well, what we are doing is allowing the freedoms that are guaranteed under Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms to all people on Canadian soil, not just select groups, which I think is a point that India could learn from.
Yeah, and I think, Jess, went in answer to your question, how the British can help. I don't think the British alone can do it, but what can happen here, I think it's people power. It's the Sikh diaspora trying to encourage as many other non-Sikhs to join in this whole campaign. And it's got to be an international effort. It's got to be from the whole diaspora countries, Canada, the US, Australia, all these countries, and also recruiting as many other countries with aligned interests to pressure India. So unfortunately, it's not going to come from Britain alone. It's got to be a combined effort, but it's also got to come from pressure from grassroots, from the people, from the diaspora. I think that's the answer to your question.
Absolutely. And history is filled with nations accepting that they've made mistakes. And for Britain to come out and just at least acknowledge that there was an overlooking of that in 1947 would definitely help as well.
Yeah. Now, following along the same lines, Mukhtar Singh comments, the UK is against Khalistan because they're guilty of stealing the wealth of the Khalsa Raj and kidnapping the heir to the sovereign throne. This, of course, is the last, the Maharaja, who was essentially, well, he says kidnapped. So, yeah, he was essentially brought to the UK as a young boy, which we've talked about in the past. The question will be asked, which they have no answer to. Yeah, I mean, I don't even need to dig into this. We've talked about it. The UK is guilty, and we owe a lot to the Sikh community. We owe a lot to the whole nation. And we've got to do something about it. I agree with that comment wholeheartedly. Nixran Jat says, crony capitalist hate agenda driven by the RSS versus socialist democratic farmers' rights, Sikhs' values. The BJP wants fascism so they can push their hate and profits agenda. This is a huge comment, and it's a big rabbit hole that I don't want to go down because we'll talk for half an hour about it. But basically, what you're highlighting here, it's not just an Indian issue. It's actually it's a human society issue. There are two main political structures in summary. There is capitalism and there's socialism. Capitalism exists primarily in the West. The West have chosen a capitalistic approach to society. Many other countries like China and Russia have taken a socialist structure. And these two are very different methods of essentially trying to move society forward. And they both sit in contrast to each other. And both of these are guilty of extremism. Capitalism can go to extremism, where we see the wealthy elite getting wealthier at the expense of others, and where they channel the wealth into a small percentage. And this essentially becomes into a form of fascism, where the wealthy elite take full control. But contrast that with socialism, which follows the same route, ironically, because it all boils back down to human nature, where even in communism, the extremes, and Marxism, the extremes of socialism, where they again fall into fascism, where they again channel the resources, the money essentially, into an elite few, and they turn into fascism, total control. So on one side we've got capitalism, on the other side we've got socialism, but ironically, through human nature, they always form at the extremes. They go full circle, and they join together in total control by a small wealthy elite. That's whichever way you look at it. History have proven that whichever side you sit on, if you go to the extremes of each side, they always meet back again in the middle of this extremist control by a small wealthy elite. So what the West and the East, in simple terms, have chosen is what is the least worst of these two structures. Is it socialism? Is it capitalism? We in the West have chosen capitalism. Russia, China and some other countries have chosen socialism. Venezuela, another good example. What's right, what's wrong? We don't know. All that we know is democracy seems to work. And as well, from our, I would say, our biased perspective here in the West, we believe that capitalism is the least worst option of these two. So, James, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one.
Right. No, I totally agree with you on that. And, of course, each system has benefits, but we feel that there's more drawbacks on the socialist system, and we feel there's more benefits on the capitalist. So that's where we sit.
Yeah. So thank you for that comment. And yeah, BJP, as you say, is following that circle back to the centre of extremism, fascism. And all of us on both sides have a responsibility to stop that. Okay, yesterday's show. Lots of things came up on this. Hardile said, "Thanks, Angus and James. Good news." I like this comment. "We come naked and we go naked." And this is just a very simple comment. We talked a lot about billionaires, and we've referred to it recently as well. This small, wealthy elite who just seem to be driven to grab as much money as they can. If you're one of these types of people, when you become a millionaire, that's not enough. They need to be billionaires. When they become billionaires, it's still not enough. They need to become trillionaires. It's almost genetic in these sorts of people. They need to accumulate wealth and control and power. There is a very tiny percentage of human beings who are like this. I call them, the 1 in 10. They are these 1 in 10 people who are just driven genetically to need to have more money and control over their fellow human beings. And they can't help themselves.
Right.
And they, through nature, they exist to drive humanity forward, not necessarily in a good way, but they exist, and they are undeniably exist, these billionaires. But this comment just brings everything back to earth, and I love this comment because, it says it all. We come into this world naked and we leave this world naked. So it doesn't matter if you are one of these people who becomes a billionaire and has total control over your fellow human beings. When you die, death is a wonderful leveller. We all leave this world the same. We all die. Nobody can avoid this, whether you're a billionaire or you're some poor, poverty-stricken individual in a slum in India. It doesn't matter. We all eventually leave this world. You cannot take it with you. So, thank you for that very philosophical comment. And James, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Oh, I just loved it. I saw that comment and I got a good chuckle out of it because of how real it is and how honest it is. It's just very simply put, very elegantly put. Thank you for sharing that comment with us.
Amrik Singh says, "You're right, Khalsa Aid is doing seva in Turkey right now." Yes, of course, James's story yesterday of Sikhs out helping the Hurricane Beryl in the Caribbean. Of course, as we mentioned in the discussion afterwards, as just a fundamental part of Sikhi is this seva, this concept of seva is helping your fellow man, is selfless service as it is. Khalsa Aid, who've been all over the world helping fellow human beings, they are in Turkey right now. So thank you for highlighting that. Final set of comments. This was an enjoyable discussion. Again, after Dr. Sandhu's discussion about the sovereignty of Khalistan. Sardul said, "I support Khalistan with its eternal capital in the city of Lahore and the towns of Rawalpindi, Sialkot and Peshawar firmly part of this country." Now, those towns are firmly within Pakistan. Any proposal for Khalistan without Lahore as its crown jewel is cowardice of the highest order. So Sardul is setting his stall out very clearly. He demands that Khalistan should actually include a lot of the original Sikh empires extending up towards Afghanistan. Now, Mukhtar responded by saying, "Let Sikhs decide what they want. Release Punjab on the Indian side first, then we'll know how to take the next step." This is a very practical comment or pragmatic step that he's saying. Say, look, no, hang on. Yes, maybe that's a great aspiration, but let's start with small steps first. Let's get the Indian side of Punjab, first of all, independent. Then we can build upon that. Now, Sardul wades in very robustly to say, "Oh, okay, Mukhtar Singh Ji, we want Lahore first. Let's free Lahore first. Let's do it now. Let's not run away from our obligations." So very defiant. He's very clear that he wants to start with the Pakistani side and Lahore. Now, Cruella, one of our regulars, says Sikhs did not stay with Pakistan. Sikhs were promised Punjab, India, a sovereign state by the Hindus, not the Pakistan, etc., etc. So what she's basically saying was, look, after partition, the Hindus promised the Sikhs that the Punjab, the Indian side of Punjab, would actually be the first sovereign state, would be the sovereign state. So let's start with that. And she says Sikhs go by the order of Khalsa, that Khalistan. Mukhtar also comes in, I guess, sarcastically. "Why don't you lead the way? Go on then." Sardul, you start. And Sardul comes back with a very firm, very robust statement. "Gee, please join me in the call to free Lahore now." So A great discussion there, and essentially it just highlights this the whole debate. Actually, where do we start with Khalistan? Now, ultimately, I think everybody is probably agreed on the Khalistan side that yes, Khalistan should include a lot of the old boundaries. It should extend into the Punjab in Pakistan. It should extend, arguably, up to the Khyber Pass, Peshawar, and maybe back up to include the old areas of Jammu Kashmir, Ladakh, etc., etc., etc. So, but yeah, James, but you've got to start somewhere. You've got to start with small steps and build upon that. And my recommendation to the Khalistan movement: take that small step. Get Punjab, Indian side of Punjab first, and build from there. That's a stepping stone. That's your bridge. That's your bridging point. That's your beachhead. James, your thoughts?
It's like I always taught my sons growing up, dealing with their mother, choose your battles. Sometimes it's wiser just to pick one and focus on that, not to spread it too far. So I think that, the goal is to start where they're at and then move forward from there. But to take it, again, like you said, baby steps.
Absolutely, and to use an old military tactic, I certainly learned in my military days was, as James said, pick your battles, and you only fight a war or fight a battle that you probably will win. So only pick your battles where you're at least 2-1, or if not 3-1, outnumbering your enemy. And it's the same principle here. Just fight the battles that you can win or have a very good chance of winning. So, Khalistan, you've got a chance of winning the Indian side of Punjab first. Do that first, then you can pick your next battle because you're building that beachhead. But unfortunately, we have been beaten once again by time. We could talk for hours, James, couldn't we, about all this? But we must draw things to a close there. You have, of course, been watching Perspectives. And don't forget, do keep these comments coming in. We're receiving lots of great comments. And as you know, we do love to discuss them and talk about these talking points. So do keep them coming in. And don't forget, you can message us directly at message@satellitetv.com on any news items that you'd like to highlight that we might have missed. But that is it. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching Perspectives. It's a goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James.
Thanks, everyone. Take care and stay safe.
You have been watching Perspectives. We will see you next time.